Welcome to this program on election administration. It's convened by the Center for the Study of Politics and Governance at the Hubert H. Humphrey School of Public Affairs. This is the School of Public Affairs of the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. I'm Larry Jacobs. I'm a faculty here at the Humphrey School and the Department of Political Science. And the Center for the Study of Politics and Governance is under my responsibility as a director, and the elections program is within the center. Just want to take a moment to say a word about the elections program we have. We offer a certificate in election administration that shares best practices in our online program with both election officials, and I know many of you are with us today, and we also prepare students who want to enter the profession of election administration. The program is online. It's 12 credits to receive the certificate, though you're free to take individual courses that might interest you. All the courses are taught by national and state experts. Many of them will be familiar to those of you who've been active in the field for some time. The program is accessible online 24 hours. We have a lot of election officials who kind of fit in the courses based on their work schedules and their family life. And it's built to be that kind of accessible program. We have a very strong placement record for graduates, and that includes election officials who take and get a certificate and then get promoted because of that. If you'd like more information, you can email us at cspg@umn.edu. I want to take a quick moment just mention some of the courses that'll be starting next week. If you'd like to take any of these courses, you can sign up for them and contact us about that. One course that's quite popular is taught by Amy Wilson, who's really a terrific instructor, famous in the Colorado area and among other friends of election administration. It's on the survey of election administration. It's a great way to either if you're in the field for a while to kind of catch up on some of the best practices, and it's an entry for those who are new to the field. The highly regarded, admirable, and fun Tammy Patrick is teaching a course on data analysis for election administration. She is absolutely terrific. This is a great course. Doug Chapin, who's a co-founder of this program, is teaching an introductory course on election security. It's a great way to kind of start that. We've now built out 3 courses on election and cybersecurity. Judd Choate from Colorado is teaching those other courses. So a lot there coming up. Just want to say a quick word about our format. We love and encourage questions. If you've got questions, you'll see there's a very nifty Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Give us your questions. If there are questions that are, maybe a little off current, raise, some real counter perspectives, please send those. We love those in particular. And we're going to get to as many of those questions as possible. As you'll see, it's a big part of what we're going to be doing here today. I want to now welcome Matt Weil, who's a great partner. I'm really grateful for his friendship and his collaboration. This was a topic that Matt suggested and is now taken charge of. Matt, as many of you know, is director of the Elections Project at the terrific Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington, D.C. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Matt. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you for having me today. I really appreciate being here. I appreciate University of Minnesota Humphrey School asking me to be here as well. So we are 9 weeks away from Election Day with a once-in-a-generation pandemic on our hands. The only thing I can be sure of right now is that the election in November is going to be unlike anything we've seen before. So Larry introduced me. I am Matthew Weil. I am the director of the Elections Project at the Bipartisan Policy Center. We are a nonprofit think tank based in Washington, D.C. A lot of what we do is focused on federal policy, but my team, my small and mighty team, is focused on elections, which, as all of you know, is really a state and local affair. So we focus on everything that can improve the voting experience. We've been involved in elections for as long as I've been at the Bipartisan Policy Center, for almost 8 years. That extends back to when President Obama established the Presidential Commission on Election Administration that was co-chaired by his White House counsel, Bob Bauer, and Governor Romney's campaign counsel, Ben Ginsburg. We helped to advise that commission, and then we brought it in-house. And we worked with that commission and the remnants of that commission, which included the great Tammy Patrick as well, for years before establishing our own BPC task force on elections that was made up of 21 state and local election officials from 17 different states, including two of our panelists today, Michael and Sherry. We released in January, which I know at this point feels like a completely different time, a report called Logical Election Policy. And this was a real look from registration through casting a ballot to how they get counted to come up with some reforms that make sense, that are implementable, and that work to actually improve the voting experience. Neither party holds all of the good ideas. Since the pandemic has upended everybody's plans for the year, we've also put out two new reports this year, one on accessing the vote during a pandemic, and one on counting the vote during the 2020 election. And I encourage you to go to BPC's website, bipartisanpolicy.org, to find those. All right, so as you may have heard from both me, from a lot of other people who are on TV all the time, we expect that voting by mail is going to see a huge increase this year. We at BPC have estimated it could be 50% to 70% of the total vote nationwide. That still means that 50 million or more voters are going to vote in person, either during early voting or at election day polling places or vote centers. And when we started talking about this, me and Larry and Kristen and his team a few months ago, there was almost no attention being paid to the in-person voting aspect. And I knew that that was going to be important now, and it certainly is. That's why I wanted to bring together this panel, this all-star panel. I will introduce them in a second, but I will say that I've been able to work with many of them, or actually all of them, for many years, and I am proud to call them friends, and I'm just in awe of what they do, and we should all thank our election officials, because what they're doing this year is absolutely amazing, and I don't think they ever get the credit they deserve. So let me just go through this very quickly, and I will do it in alphabetical order, so I apologize, Michael, as a fellow W, that you're going to be last. Our first is Adrian Fontes, who is the county recorder in Maricopa County, Arizona. As the county recorder, he oversees voter registration and early voting, maintains the recorded documents for the county. Sherry Poland is the executive director of the Hamilton County Board of Elections in Ohio, and she is also a member of BPC's task force on elections. Michael Winn is the director of elections in Harris County, Texas, also a member of BPC's task force on elections. So again, thank you all for being here today. And I want to make sure this is a very conversational opportunity. All three of you have so much to offer. So I'm going to prompt you with questions. And I also encourage all of our viewers to add your questions down in that link at the bottom. And I will get to as many as I can. All right, so just kind of to throw the first question to all of you is that even though in-person voting volumes will be down relative to 2020, we've heard in a lot of jurisdictions that they're also reducing the polling place capacity because they're also trying to scale up that absentee voting. So what is happening in your jurisdiction, and how are you planning to handle in-person election day voting? So I'll start with you, Sherry.
Yes, well, typically in Hamilton County, prior to COVID, 70% of our voters choose to vote on election day, even though no-fault absentee has been available to voters for well over a decade. So the vast majority prior to COVID still vote on election day. So we think we're going to have high numbers on election day that appear. And one of the things, or several of the things we started doing immediately after our presidential primary is to plan for that. And we did that by reaching out to our poll workers. We did surveys. We understand if you want to sit this one out, but we needed to know that sooner rather than later. So we sent those surveys out late spring, early summer. And then we also reached out to our polling locations. At that time, there was all, different ideas about how the election was going to be conducted. And we wanted to let them know that here in Ohio, in Hamilton County, we would need their polling locations. And we were showing up on November 3rd. And I'm really happy to report that we only lost a handful of polling places. There was only a few we had to consolidate. So very happy with that. Also had to take a look, though, at our polling location layouts. We had to redesign all of those so that we can maintain the 6-foot social distancing. And we worked in consultation with our public health department to do that. So, we're on track. Our polling locations are locked down. We're ready to go for November 3rd for in-person voting. As far as locations are concerned, we're still actively recruiting poll workers. As of this moment, we have 75% of our positions filled, which is good. But we say we never take the gas pedal off of recruiting poll workers, because one that's confirmed today may cancel on you tomorrow. So that's sort of never ending. And then we also, in these efforts of securing the polling locations and the poll workers, we're making sure they're informed of the steps we're taking to keep them as safe as possible at the polling place. And that's securing the PPE and the cleaning and the 6-foot social distancing and all of that. So along the way, we've been educating, the polling locations, the poll workers, and the voters, so that those that choose to vote on election day can do so safely.
Great. Michael, what have you been doing in Harris County, Texas to prepare for what you think is the likely turnout in person during the early voting and on election day periods?
First of all, I want to thank BPC and the University of Minnesota for allowing me to be here today. We serve 2.4 million registered voters. And so here in Harris County, in even-numbered elections in Harris County, the overwhelming majority of voters have opted to vote before Election Day. In 2016, 66% of the voters voted early and 10% voted by mail. We implemented very early a 24-point initiative for the voters of Harris County that included providing personal protection equipment to election workers and all those who needed it. We increased the number of voting centers to a record 120 early voting sites and a record number of election day sites. We have over 800 election day sites that we're doing here in Harris County. We were increasing the numbers of workers, poll workers, to as many as 12,000 poll workers. And I'm very happy to say that in our past July runoff election, we had over 2,500 election workers, and they were strong. We didn't have anyone back out. We had reserves, and we had pool of people in reserves. We expect to have the very same here, and for the election day, we're not seeing any issues with trying to find polling locations. In the past, when we looked at polling locations, we used different types of locations: schools, churches, even garages. Now with this pandemic, we've had to go ahead and expand to a fairly wide range of polling locations like gymnasiums, convention centers, and partnering with sports arenas. And so we're very fortunate in the fact that we're able to have those partnerships. And then just kind of continuing on through our initiatives, we looked at relocating our operations from our main office to a bigger facility. Many of you who have come through Houston know that the Houston Texans play at the NRG Arena. And so we're going to be there, and we'll set up base camp there at that arena. So, I mean, we're doing a lot of innovative things. We're looking at trying to make sure that we include our stakeholders, we include members of the community, our community advisory boards. We're doing all those things and those positive things to make sure that we have a safe, secure, and effective election.
That's great. Adrian, Maricopa County in Arizona is a lot of things. It's got urban, it's got rural, it's gigantic, it's got most of the voters in Arizona. So how are you managing this new environment for Election Day and early voting?
Well, first of all, thanks, Matt. Thanks to BPC and the University of Minnesota as well, the Humphrey School, and Larry for thinking of having me. Yeah, Maricopa County, I have to give Michael a little bit of a hard time. We just passed you guys. I think we've got about 30,000 more voters than you do. So we're pushing up against 2.5 million right now. We're hoping to get there by the time voter registration closes. So we're now the second largest jurisdiction in the United States behind Los Angeles County. And a lot of people don't realize that. We've got 5 congressional districts completely inside of our jurisdiction. And we do have some precincts where we've got to deploy our one poll worker the night before so that they can arrive down on the Tohono O'odham reservation at a very remote feast house in one of our Native American villages down there by the time the poll is supposed to open by law at 6 a.m. in the morning. So we've got everything from some of the most dense urban areas and to that. Now, election day, our plans a little bit different than others. In Arizona, since we invented or created the permanent early vote list back in 2007, our number of no excuse absentee voters, as Jerry mentioned, has increased significantly. We started at about 50% back in 2007. We are well over 75%, I think, right now in Maricopa County. And that means, let me give you a quick rundown. In 2018, our August primary had 85% of the vote by early ballot. That includes ballot by mail from the permanent early vote list and our folks who showed up in person. In 2020, just a few weeks ago, on August 4th, we had 94% of our vote come in by early ballot, either by mail or in person. And so because of the onset of COVID-19, back in March for our presidential preference election, which is our version of the primary here, we had to adjust from a precinct-based polling place model, which I know Harris County just got away from. Congratulations on getting the whole thing done for you guys, into a vote center model. And we only had 5 days to execute that plan because we had lost so many polling places so quickly in mid-March. We did get our election done on time. We didn't have any long lines, but we did have a few more months up until this August to plan. The strategy we're using is a phased opening strategy. So for our early voting season, which in Arizona is 27 days long, we will start with a handful of vote centers open 27 days before Election Day. 2 weeks prior to Election Day, we will open 40 more vote centers. And then 1 week prior to Election Day, we'll open another 40 vote centers. Now, these vote centers are vote anywhere vote centers. We're also using very large capacity areas with lots of check-in lines, lots of poll booths. And again, any voter can vote anywhere. And we should get up to hopefully about 150 by the time we get to Election Day. Now, that having been said, we're expecting something in the neighborhood of 90% of our vote to come in before Election Day, either in the mail or in person in November. Arizonans are very used to voting by mail, and we are trying very hard to message out to get those ballots in early. Moreover, the early voting profile in those vote centers that we have set up is really going to help alleviate the pressure from Election Day, which always comes with that last weekend scramble of deploying equipment, setting up equipment, having folks working just that one day. We will have poll workers who have been working at vote centers for, in some cases, 2-3 weeks ahead of time. So they'll understand the systems, the openings, the closings, and so forth by the time we get to Election Day. So we are expecting record turnout, but we're not expecting record turnout on Election Day because in Maricopa County and in Arizona, we have an election season. We like it that way. Although we do only have one weather season. It's hot, hotter, and super hot, varying degrees of that. But I think we're going to be in pretty good shape. And I actually want to yet again repeat my kudos to my friends over in the greater Houston area. Michael, you guys going to all vote centers was something that we wanted to do back in 2017 for the 2018 cycle. We could not get it past our board. Now they're all on board, and it's working very well for our voters. So I appreciate you guys pioneering that for us.
Well, I just kind of want to just say thank you, Adrian, because you've always been, a role model and also an inspiration. I had the opportunity to come down to Arizona, check out some of your processes, some of your programs, and I'm gonna tell you, I'm not. I'll steal if it's a good program, and you guys have a wonderful program, and thank you for all that you do.
Well, I think it's just borrowing. As long as you give them credit, you're fine with it. I know Sherry will tell you the same thing. So
Absolutely.
there's been a lot of talking about vote centers, which I think are important, and I do want to talk about that a little bit. But Sherry, can you just walk us through when you're selecting polling places? I mean, just getting into the nuts and bolts. What are you looking for? What is the process you do for how to kind of prepare the setup for the poll workers? I mean, I assume that you're not letting the poll workers decide on their own how to do it. And what are the considerations you had to change, both for your primary, which is mostly mail and delayed, but what are you doing for November to either change the polling places you have or to find new ones?
Right. Well, for election day polling places, I do want to note we're a little bit different in Ohio. We do have early voting in person for 28 days, but it's only at one facility per county. So each county is only permitted to have one early vote center. So we're a little different than my counterparts here. For election day voting, I think the most important thing is we try not to change polling places often. If we don't have to change the polling places, we don't. We're out there in the community. Voters, they get accustomed to where they go to vote. So that's the first thing. We try not to change unless we have to. Of course, top on the list is to make sure that it is ADA compliant. And we have a checklist that actually is an electronic checklist that our teams take out and survey the polling places. And then we look at, other areas of accessibility. Is there enough parking, and how, close it is? Will people in the community have to travel far? All of those types of things. And we had all of that set and ready to go for March 17th, which was our scheduled primary election day. And then literally at the 11th hour, late on March 16th, we were ordered to keep all of the polling places closed on March 17th. And about a week before that, we had been ordered by the state to move any polling places in senior living facilities out into someplace else. So we scrambled to do that by March 17th, but we're ready, even though we were eventually ordered to keep the polls closed. So we kept that, all of those polling locations the same. So we're already out of the senior living facilities, don't need to worry about that. Although I will note, we are making sure the voters who live in those facilities do have the opportunity to vote. Of course, not only by mail, but some of them need assistance. And we're working with the facilities so that we can send a bipartisan team, as we have in the past, to vote them. Some of the facilities, though, are not allowing anyone else in. So this is a little bit of a different challenge. And what we're doing, as if we have facilities that will not allow us in, then we are working with the staff currently at the nursing home that work there, and we're going to deputize them as special precinct election officials. And we're going to train them through Zoom, deputize them so that a member of each party that currently works there can then assist those voters. So I just wanted to mention that. We talk a lot about moving nursing or polling locations out of nursing home, and just wanted to make sure there is a way for those voters to continue to cast their ballot. So those are the things that we looked for, and finding the polling places. Again, we're locked down. We were able to secure what we believe will be a good complement. We're able to do the social distancing. We did have to get a little bit creative in trying to maintain the 6-foot social distancing with the voting booths. We had worked with our public health officials to say, well, if we put the voting booths that have the privacy shields back to back, is that sufficient? Is that enough of a barrier? And they came back with this and said, well, if you could extend it another so many inches, then it would. So, my team worked together, and now we have voting booth extenders that we're putting out to the polling place, because we don't want there to be wait times, right? So we needed to be able to give our full complement of voting booths.
I appreciate that. And Adrian, when you're looking for new vote center sites, what is the ideal site, and what do you look for in these locations?
Well, it's the panoply. It's the same thing everybody else looks for. We want to make sure that we're ADA compliant. We want to make sure that we are on or near mass transit lines. We want to make sure there's plenty of parking. We want to make sure that there are sufficient facilities for our staff, our poll workers or vote center workers. But we also go out and we make sure that, particularly here, our August isn't exactly paradise weather in the Metro Phoenix area. So we've got to make sure we have sufficient air conditioning so that our staff is comfortable. But one of the other things that we have to make sure of, and we go out and measure, is what do the cell tower signals look like, because we operate our voter check-in system, our site books, which are custom made here in Maricopa County. We created the programming, the architecture, and everything else ourselves. We got to make sure those systems are going to work. So we've got to test for power availability. We've got to test for the signals to make sure that we can support what we need to support. We have a long checklist, and we do, just like Sherry, and I'm sure Michael does the same thing. We send those teams out there with their measuring tape and their power outlet checkers and the little internet gizmos that check signal, all that fancy stuff that I can't operate personally, but it's a long list. And now we have those additional COVID-19 questions as well. So we've actually engaged in a partnership with the county real estate department, and we have a significant investment in commercial real estate right now that we've leased for the 5-month period from the primary into and through the general, because we could not depend on so many other places. They were uncertain for us, and we needed very large venues with plenty of space for all the social distancing. And we're talking about, in some cases, tens of thousands of square feet, so that we could house the very large vote centers with multiple check-in lines and voting booths, all sufficiently spaced. So we're investing a good amount of money in making sure that we've got all the distancing we need as well. So they don't just use the little regular tape measures now. Our folks have those the rolls that you see out on construction sites when they're out there measuring spaces.
That's great. Michael, can you walk us through what a Harris County voter will experience on Election Day? Are they going to see poll workers in PPE? Is there going to be hand sanitizer? Are they going to have their own pens? What is the voting experience going to be like for in-person voting?
Great question. And so in Harris County, when we first faced this pandemic, we put together a COVID plan. And within that COVID plan, we talked about all the aspects of conducting the election from A to Z. And that included training, that included looking for polling locations, that included going out and doing all the necessary work that Adrian and that Sherry both do in terms of looking at connectivity and making sure that all those polling places would be able to sustain the election. And then we started digging down deep, and through our initiative plan that we had put into place, we had a plan that talked about PPEs. We had a plan that talked about optimizing the ballot. We had a plan looking at polling places. And within that, we looked at how do you set up a polling place? We did mock diagrams, mock schematics, and during our training with our judges and educating our community advisory groups and stakeholders, we talked about what would a voter and a poll worker experience going into the polling place. So then you began to start looking at distancing equipment out, looking at these larger venues, looking at shields, looking at sanitizers, buying sanitizing stations, face shields, masks, finger cots, individual wipes, pens that you can disinfect, and then we started to put all of these things down on paper, and then sharing that in a training program with our judges, which we did virtually. And I tell you, when you train 2,000 individuals on Zoom, you become an expert real quick. And so those are just a few of the things that we did. But I think the most important piece of this whole puzzle was being able to conduct the stakeholders meetings that we had weekly with everyone, keeping them updated, which included the party representatives, which included our elected officials, our governing authority, and even individuals who wanted to come in and see what we were doing in Harris County. And so that played a real big part in educating the public and keeping everybody up to speed. And then finally, getting all of these things blessed through our health professionals, making and working with a coalition of health professionals, looking at your processes and working with Brennan Center and working with other agencies just to talk about our process and making sure that people were educated and aware of what was happening in Harris County.
That's great. I just want to remind all of our viewers that you can start putting your questions in the Q&A box, and I will get to those in the next 5 or 10 minutes. But Sherry, I did want to ask you the same question. I mean, I look at Michael and Adrian, and at least for November, they don't have the worst weather, but Ohio sometimes does have not so great November weather. And you have probably the most in-person voting on election day of the 3 election officials on this call. And so what is the experience going to be like in October and November during early voting and election day voting for voters in Hamilton County?
Yes, well, fortunately, Cincinnati, Hamilton County, we're at the southernmost part of Ohio. We border Kentucky, so a lot of times we get by without seeing that first snowfall until after Election Day. I hope that holds true.
It's 2020 though, so don't count on that.
Exactly, it is 2020, yeah. So we of course have to have our backup shovels and salt ready to go as well. But for early voting, as I mentioned before, we typically see about 7 to 10% of our voters vote early in person. Along with everything else, I think that's going to be higher this year. We do, luckily, that does include 2 full weekends. So that's good. We have 2 Saturdays, 2 Sundays before. And the final week, we actually have 11 hours Monday through Friday. We're 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Well, we were fortunate enough that we were able to secure additional space. The campus that our building sits on, space became available that will more than double what our typical early in-person voting center holds. So we were excited about that and kind of setting that up already. As we're not too far away from the start of early voting, but it'll look, similar to what we expect in-person voting on Election Day to look like. We have, masks for all of the poll workers. We have the face shields. We have additional disposable masks so that if a voter forgets to wear a mask, they can be offered one when they come in. The hand sanitizer. All of that sort of set up the workflow that they can enter through one door and then exit a different door, so you don't have the cross traffic. So, I think even had to come up with a new campaign area, for the campaigners, because even though there's a campaign neutral zone surrounding the polling place, campaigning is a part of the process too. So we've enlarged our campaign area so that they can try to have some sort of 6-foot social distancing for those who decide to stand out in front of an early vote center.
Thank you. So I got a question, and it actually matches a question I was going to ask you. So I'm going to read Ken Zakin's question from the audience. And he said, the physical and infrastructure changes required for this year, where did the financing come from? If it was federal, was the timing appropriate, and was it hassle-free? So I'll run through, I'll go to Adrian first.
Yeah, so we're fortunate in Maricopa County. We just really shifted an entire aspect of our administration. Prior to my coming into office in January, the county recorder, which is my office now, ran everything, soup to nuts, from registration, early voting, election day, our emergency voting, which is the weekend prior to election day, tabulation, the whole 9 yards. We just entered into a partnership with the Board of Supervisors, the County Board of Supervisors, where we share a lot of those duties, which is a very good thing, and it brought a lot more resources to bear. And so they're very invested in making sure that we have what we need to operate. But we also did see a good chunk of COVID funding come in. Various counties in Arizona are doing various things. I can't speak to Texas or Ohio, but the nature of the distribution I think that we're using is unique to Arizona. We have some joint ventures that we're going into with the Secretary of State, who's really charged with distribution of those funds to the counties. It was, it's difficult to answer that question. Was it timely? because really what we would have wanted to see is all of these funds come in a year ago. Everybody on this call understands, I think, that elections planning is a very long-term project, and if you don't have that funding locked in a long time ago, it's going to be tough. I mean, I had to sign a PO for $180,000 worth of hand sanitizer way back in late March for the August primary. So no, it wasn't timely in a perfect world, but in the world that we live in now, we'll take it when we can get it. The distribution really was, I think, particular. I'll say this, it was peculiar because it's a unique circumstance. So was it ideal? It's never ideal when you're dealing with the one-off. You can always look back and say it could have been better, but we've received a good bit of funding, and I think we are well positioned for the fall. I'm hoping everybody else had equally good, as equally satisfactory, at least, of an experience as we did.
Michael, Sherry, do you want to add to that?
Sure. You know, the pandemic hit us probably around February, March, like it hit everyone else. You know, by that time, your budget was already in. And so the unfortunate part of all of this is that there had to be some emergency funding allocated to jurisdictions to conduct their elections. And so we were very fortunate in Harris County in the fact that, you know, our governing authority, our commissioner's court, had the forward thinking of agreeing with some of the recommendations that we had made based on our initiative program and allocating additional funds to the elections department. And so we were able, you know, to quickly procure, you know, $12 million. And then there was a partnership through the Secretary of State where monies came down from some of this CARES funding. And so we were privileged to get some of those monies. And so, you know, as we began to prepare for the election, we were like most other jurisdictions in the country. We were fighting and scrapping, trying to get sanitizers, sanitizing stations, the finger cots, all the things that we all needed to conduct a safe, secure election. And so we were all fighting to get that equipment. And fortunately, we were able to get it. And even now, I think there's a crunch to get some of that equipment to be prepared for November. But I think for the most part, I'm happy with what I'm seeing. I know the procurement process in most jurisdictions, you know, it's a process. And you know, we as administrators, you know, we are focused in on trying to make the election safe and secure for all of our constituents. And so now we're trying to figure out how do you work through the procurement process. Just like Adrian talked about, you know, he had to, you know, sign, you know, purchase orders for hundreds of thousands of dollars for equipment. And so I think for many of us, it's a process that we go through, and we're fortunate in Harris County to have a good process in place.
Yeah, I think that one of the things we saw due to the decentralized nature of our primaries and the fact that they were being held over a series of months is while you were in competition with each other for a lot of the same things, the deadlines weren't all the same. November, obviously, November is November. Everyone is November. And so there will be a little more competition. But Sherry, did you feel like, or do you feel like you are getting the resources you need in a timely manner in your jurisdiction?
I do think so, yes. We received CARES funding that was funneled through our Ohio Secretary of State. And although it's not going to be enough for all the additional expenses that we are having due to administering a presidential election during a pandemic, but we're also seeing donations come in. The Ohio Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, has worked with Anheuser-Busch, and they have donated thousands of gallons of hand sanitizers to boards of elections across the state. Also as a local, another company that donated so many disposable masks. So in addition to the funding, we're getting some donations too. That is going to be helpful. Of course, there's a procurement process with all of this, but, you know, in government, we're used to that, you know, and it should be that way. when we're dealing with taxpayers' dollars. So it's not, although it might be cumbersome, it's not a hurdle. It's something we're used to, and we'll get it done so that we spend the money wisely.
Matt, if I could, a very
Sure.
anecdote about being in competition with one another in March, early March, when the pandemic was really gearing up and folks were very much, I won't say in panic mode, but I think the attention had increased significantly. One of the reasons why we had to switch from a precinct-based polling place model to a vote center model was specifically because of the lack of PPE. You see, California had declared an emergency about 1 week prior to our March 17th presidential preference election. And what that did was take almost all of the personal protective equipment that was on its way to us out of the supply chain and over to California under their emergency declaration, because Arizona had not yet declared an emergency. And so we looked across the board and we said, we cannot support the number of polling places that we had established. We have to go to a much smaller model and therefore make them vote anywhere vote centers. So we were forced by this competition of resources to make the adjustment that we needed to make. Thankfully, we have a very talented team here at Maricopa Elections who did yeoman's work in shifting. But imagine going from what has been your model for a very long time into something completely new in 5 days and reprogramming the entire system to make it happen. I have to give kudos to the folks at Maricopa Elections and my recorder's office. They did a great job under extreme pressure.
That's great. So we have another question from the audience, from an anonymous attendee. How are you planning on handling social distancing and policing those voters waiting in line? Is it just going to be signs? Are you asking the poll workers to do that? And I'll add to this question kind of the very politicized question about masks. What is being required of your poll workers and of voters in your jurisdictions? So I'll just kind of go around the horn here. I'll start with Michael first.
That's a great question. The first thing that we did that I realized from our primary election, especially in regards to masks, and I don't know what they do in other jurisdictions, but when you do contracts, put it in your contract with your entities. If you put it in your contracts with your entities, if you're conducting those elections, you put it out front. People know that you want them to wear PPEs, and then it really does not become a question. The other thing is, you have to have an educational program. We're very fortunate in that we have a voter outreach team. They do things through social media, through our website, through print media, through mass media. And so we do those things to make sure that information, again, is broadcast not only to the community, but also to folks who go to our website and see some of the many things that we're doing. The process of doing the schematics and going in very early and incorporating it on your training program by talking about how do you distance voters out when you set up a polling location, from the distance marker down to where the voter has the first-hand experience in the polling location, the machines that are distanced out, the shields that are put up, the protocols put in place when a voter interacts with the poll worker. All those things are very important when you talk about trying to get information to the voter and making sure that your poll workers are conducting a safe and effective election.
Great. Adrian, I'm going to ask you the same question about masks and social distancing. I'm going to add for you, because I know that this is an issue in Arizona. How are you accommodating people with language barriers and needs, voters with disabilities? Obviously, there are limitations on how many people you can have in a polling place, but these are still federal requirements. And so how are you handling all of that in addition to the masks and social distancing?
Well, our Board of Supervisors wisely has implemented a mask mandate here countywide. And I absolutely, support that, and I support them in that effort. However, we, fall under the federal mandate. You can't deny anyone the right to vote. So, if folks decide not to wear a mask, we have to deal with that. We actually, part of our strategy is to make sure that we have at least one extra person, not just the marshal for the vote center, but we've got a line monitor who's going to be helping folks make sure that they've got their appropriate ID ready. We are an ID all the time at vote centers or polling places state. Also to make sure that our early voters who are just dropping off those early ballots can just get right straight to the front, drop them off and go on about their business. So we're really going to be paying as much attention to the voter experience and informing folks as they arrive, working those lines up and down. It also helps because we're going to make sure to maintain tight monitoring on how what the wait times are, so that if we need to deploy additional resources to any particular vote center, we'll have that information in real time, which is very valuable for us. I can't, Matt, the second part of your question just slipped my mind.
So how are you serving voters with language barriers and any voters with disabilities who are going to struggle if they don't have support?
Yeah, we've been working very closely with the Arizona Center for Disability Law and Abilities 360, one of our nonprofits here. We've got new vote devices that have all kinds of great new, I'll say bells and whistles, but I don't want to sound demeaning about it, really new capacity building features for our voters with disabilities. And we're training our folks specifically on making sure that our voters are empowered to make their choices independently. As far as language is concerned, we're undergoing a pretty hard effort to recruit a bilingual workforce. As you know, we're covered under Section 203 at the very least for Spanish language. But we also have a lot of other folks that speak a lot of other different languages. In jurisdictions this size, you can't avoid that. So we're reaching out to the community, particularly in geographic areas where we have concentrations of, while not mandated, hopefully we'll be able to get folks in those areas that speak those varieties of languages in case folks need clarification. But we're doing as much as we can to make sure that we are accommodating voters, the voter experience being probably one of the most important things that we pay attention to as we're moving forward with all of our planning.
Matt, if I could interject real quick, one of the things that we're doing in Harris County, of course, we support 4 different languages, Vietnamese, Chinese, Spanish, and of course, English. And so one of the additional things that we were able to kind of stumble upon was the fact that we had some poll books that we had that were end of life. And there are vendors out there who do sell a program that can give you different languages in sell you a program in many different languages that you can put on these poll books that you can use, and they're very interactive. So not only do we hire to make sure that we make sure that we cover all the 4 languages, but we've also incorporated some technology in our polling locations to help deal with the language barrier. So that is available as well.
We have about 10 minutes left, so I want to get to as many of these great questions as we can. I'll note that I'm trying to stick with the questions that are most focused on the very unique situation we're in right now with voting during a pandemic in person. But some of these questions are great about voting in person just generally. So Sherry, I just wanted to ask you what you're doing, what the contingencies are for voters who come in not wearing a mask. Are you putting them in a different area? What is the plan?
Yes, well, in Ohio, we do have a mask mandate throughout the state. We have secured extra disposable masks. So if a voter comes in without a mask, we will offer them one. We had a very small special election in August, and we found that most voters, if they walked in without a mask, they simply forgot. And when they were offered one, they had no problem putting it on. But yes, as Adrian said, no one will be turned away. If a voter comes in and wishes to vote and refuses to put a mask on, they will be able to vote, just diverted to try to have as least the amount of contact as possible with anyone else. I think one thing that we have in our favor going into November that we didn't have when we were doing in-person voting and many of our primaries and in the spring is that we're all sort of becoming accustomed to this now. You know, when we go into grocery stores, wherever, we wear a mask. We look on the floor for the 6 foot, you know, social distance markers. Where's my please stand here sign? So I think that'll hopefully work in our favor in November because we're all as a society getting used to this.
I appreciate that. A good question coming in from Tom Sowers. Apologize if I'm getting that last name wrong. About whether election officials are feeling political pressure. Seems more than ever, the administration of elections has now become completely politicized. So, Michael, I'm going to give that one to you.
Well, you know, one of the first things that I noticed when I came to Harris County was, you know, the welcoming committee was there, and I got indoctrinated very, very quickly into the process. The parties play a big part in the elections process. You know, we as administrators try to remain as nonpartisan as we can. But, you know, sometimes that's a little bit difficult. And so that there's this struggle. But I think by having informed stakeholders meetings involving everyone in the process pretty much reduces that to a certain extent. It's still highly politicized, but you learn to adapt. And so I think for the most part, it's just more of information sharing.
So Adrian, I'm gonna ask you a question from Cheryl Bailey. I'm not gonna give you the political question. But I'm gonna add to Cheryl's question. So let me read Cheryl Bailey's question for you. It says, when are you allowed to start counting the ballots that are mailed in? And how long does a citizen have to take back their vote if they change their minds? I know this is going to vary by state, obviously, but I'll add to it because there's been a rumor circulating on Facebook, as rumors tend to do. And it's about, well, if I mail in my ballot on Sunday before Election Day, I'll be able to go to the polls and cast another ballot in person, and they'll never know that I voted twice. And I want you to just walk through quickly as you can why that's not a problem, and then also answer Shell's question.
So first and foremost, Arizona had previously 7 days before election day to begin tabulating those early ballots. And that's because we had so many early ballots. You got to verify the signature. You got to take the ballot out of the envelope in a process that is very carefully audited. And then you got to tabulate them and report out. So we had 7 days, but our volume grew so much in our ballot by mail system that the state legislature, in a completely bipartisan move, which is sometimes unusual mostly unusual in Arizona, they gave us 14 days ahead of election day. So we're going to start tabulating ballots 2 weeks prior to election day, and those as we start processing those early ballots. So we're in great shape. I feel terrible for any jurisdiction that has to wait till election day. And if there are any policymakers on this call, state legislators, staffers, anybody, if your state doesn't allow your administrator to start tabulating before election day, get that changed now. It is incredibly difficult, given the circumstances that we have politically out there.
I will note that is a BPC Task Force on Elections recommendation. It's long been a recommendation. It just makes good logical sense. Again, it's one of those things that's now become politicized, kind of in a weird way.
Absolutely. And as far as taking back a vote or votes kind of being cast, one coming in the mail and one coming in person, what we've done with our Sitebook voter check-in system is it is tied directly to our voter registration system, which is where the voter file is kept. And so let's say, for example, you cast your ballot and you vote your ballot and you send it in the mail. If while it's in transit, you decide to come and vote in person and you draw another ballot, the system will know that you drew that ballot, regardless of wherever that other ballot is. So if we haven't gotten it received and signature verified yet, and the new ballot that you draw is your ballot, and the other one will get canceled, not counted, not even signature verified. If, however, we've already got that first ballot that you sent in the mail in, we've got it checked in for signature verification. When you come in person, you will be issued a provisional ballot. Just like anybody else who has a question, whether it's an ID question or otherwise, provided that you are validly voting, that one will count. In this circumstance, however, with that one traveling through the mail and in the signature verification, that's the one we got first. That's the one we're going to tabulate. This provisional ballot will be canceled. But what we actually did with this new system was it's a real-time system that operates across the entire jurisdiction. Again, we know exactly when that first ballot hits us, whether it's issued at a vote center or whether it gets us to us in the mail. We'll cancel any subsequent ballots that come in after that so that each voter only has that one shot. We've seen it happen a couple times. Voters sometimes, they either forget that they mailed it in or they mailed it in close to election day. They may not think that it came in, so they'll come in and vote in person. We don't think that that's a fraudulent thing. We think that's voters being cautious. So we're going to give them the opportunity to make sure that that one.
But the point is, of course, that you're not going to count two ballots. I mean, I feel like the rumor that is spreading is that this is a giant loophole that it just really doesn't exist. We only have about 5 minutes left, and so I want to get to two last questions that I think are great. And so I'm just going to throw this very quick one to the entire group, and whoever wants to take it, you'll get that one. It's about voter ID and mask requirements. How do you actually verify the person is who they say they are if they're wearing a mask? That's a great question we got from Pam Eckhart, and I hadn't thought about it. So who wants to take that one?
I'll take a stab at it first. You know, voter ID is very apparent in Texas, and so you have to present an ID. There are some situations where if you are wearing a mask, there's questions of whether or not someone will either drop the mask or present the ID. We haven't had an issue to where we've had to address that very readily. You know, our voters in Texas are pretty well educated in that process. They tend to comply. However, if you don't do it, you're offered a provisional ballot, and that kind of comes with a little agitation, but that's the process, and it seems to work here in Texas.
All right, I'm going to give you each 1 minute to answer the last question I have, and then I'm going to wrap it up. Because of the pandemic, because of all the changes that have been thrust upon the country, and I may know where Adrian's going to go. And this is a question we've gotten from April Reardon. Do you see a point in the future, maybe 10 or 20 years away, where in-person voting just goes away completely? It seems like the move to voting by mail has been pretty smooth. And so are you preparing for that to be the case? I'll start with Sherry, and I'll give you 1 minute.
Sure. If you would have asked me that question prior to 2020, I would have said absolutely not, because we've had no fault absentee voting, as I stated before, for over a decade, and still 70% choose to vote on election day. I think that's an interesting question. I can't imagine election day voting, in-person voting going away altogether. I still think, at least in our little corner of the world in Hamilton County, it's extremely popular. But I think this upcoming November will be telling. It'll be interesting to see where we land on November 3rd.
Michael?
I have to agree with Sherry. If you had asked me that before, I would have said you were crazy. But now with this pandemic, it's forced a lot of us election administrators to think outside of the box. I think that this upcoming election is going to be very telling. As I mentioned before, in Harris County, 66% of the folks voted early and in person. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how that turns out for this upcoming election.
All right, Adrian. I mean, certainly Maricopa in Arizona has a lot of voting by mail, so you guys are probably the closest.
I'm going to surprise you with my answer, Matt.
Really?
I'm going to say definitely no. We will never get rid of in-person voting. I think it's absolutely necessary, particularly if you have ballot replacement issues, if you have any other kinds of issues that must be resolved in person. We have to support our voters the way that they want to vote. And while the vast majority want to vote by mail, they love the convenience, we love the lack of expense. I think the in-person option will remain on the table, and I hope it does.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate the 1 minute answer from all of you. Thank you for being panelists today. I will say we have so many good unanswered questions that I've gotten from the audience. I encourage you to seek out these 3 election officials because they're some of the best out there. You can find the work that my team is doing at bipartisanpolicy.org. I want to point to a few resources that are available to you through the Humphrey School. And again, thank you for all watching today. We can talk for another hour, but we will give you back the rest of your day. And thank you.